Okay, and we're live. How did you like the video?
Hey, I find myself really wanting to click that bit.ly link.
Yeah, so Bridget, Karen, thank you to both of you for joining us today. Our live stream today is about the upcoming CFP for KubeCon CloudNativeCon EU, and how people, if they want to submit to the conference, any tips, tricks that both of you have. And I know both of you were on the program committee for KubeCon previously, but before we kind of like jump in, maybe we could do some quick introduction and then let's walk through the process of actually submitting a CFP. So Bridget, do you want to go first?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having us on, Bill. I'm Bridget Kromhout. I work at Microsoft. I'm a PM focused on Kubernetes ecosystem open source. And the thing I'm the most excited about for KubeCon is we get to hear so many stories from the people who are using these open source projects and building with and what they're accomplishing. So I'm really excited.
Cool. Hey everyone, I'm Karen. I am a community PM at Microsoft, and I'm focused on our open source cloud native projects. And for the last conference, I was a co-chair for KubeCon. And yeah, I mean, I really like reviewing talks just because like oftentimes so much happens out there and you're just like, you don't get to see it all, but when you're reviewing talks, you do. And so, you know, I'm really excited for people to kind of share what they've been up to and, you know, just spread the word on all the innovative ideas that have been happening.
Oh yeah, the track that you co-chaired was, it was the community one, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe that's a really good place for us to start. Should we maybe say, and Bill, maybe you can kind of weigh in on this too, what some of the structure of KubeCon even looks like? Like tracks, what are those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess maybe we can like start from the top. I think there's the two like co-chairs. So in this past one, it was Constance from Splunk and Steven from VMware. And they sit down with Priyanka, who's the general manager, and figure out like, hey, what's like the general structure we want to have with KubeCon, and what do we think the most exciting and important topics are? And then from that, they come up with like different tracks, which I think are like topic areas about like how, like where we want to like put things. So things like service mesh, or like Kubernetes 101, and like how to get started in the community, or the community track. And then from there, there's different like people to review the different tracks. And then, yeah. Yeah, do you want to chat?
Yeah, real quick, I did want to mention, you know, Bill mentioned the KubeCon 101 track. So actually, this isn't a track that always existed, but it's something that came, that was brought into fruition, I think, for the last two events. And so I just wanted to point out that, you know, tracks coming, or I guess they don't get eliminated, but new ones happen, and a lot of this is just based on feedback from the audience, and like, you know, based on like the audience that comes to KubeCon. So just wanted to say, like, if people feel like there's a strong need for a specific track and they want to share that, like the organizers are always open to that feedback, right? Because like this is a result of people asking for it. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Two tracks that I've heard like people talk about that like could be introduced in a future KubeCon. One is like Kubernetes or cloud native like failure stories. I know there's a lot of great content in the community about like what goes wrong. I know Spotify in one of the keynotes previously at KubeCon talked about when they like, I think, took down like half their production clusters.
I think that we should dive in. We should dive in on that, because I think that's a really important point. I talk to people who think, oh, I can't give a conference talk because we're not done. I can't give a conference talk because this didn't all go well. Well, we aren't using Kubernetes enough, not like the really major shops, not like the important people. Oh, our project has so many road bumps, and we went a different direction than we thought we did. And maybe we had some Mesos and we thought we were going to Kubernetes, but we ended up putting some of it on Nomad and some of it on Kubernetes. I can't tell that story. People have all of these misconceptions. Karen, what's the reality of it?
I mean, I think, I think I don't want to say, okay. I think there are often reasons to not do something. But, I think in a situation like this, I think you should just try it out. I think, a lot of the people who are reviewing, or basically, I mean, the program committee is like a very diverse group and everyone comes from different backgrounds. And I think given that, like, people are not everyone's judging you the same way, essentially, and that's by design, right? So I would still encourage you to submit, because yeah, another thing that I thought of, that that other people might be concerned about when it comes to submitting is like if they have things that like aren't necessarily like yet released, right? And that's what you were saying, and you feel like you can't totally talk about it yet. I've definitely still seen submissions come in where like, like this is like a TBD project, right? And I think that's okay because a lot of us work in this industry and we understand like how these things work. And so I would still encourage you to submit. Yeah.
What do you think about that, Bill?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have not been on the program committee for KubeCon. I'm not as distinguished as both of you, but I have helped out at some other conferences. And I mean, you see like a totally like wide range of proposals. And I think it's even more interesting to see like when things don't go wrong, because I think everybody knows the real world is very messy. It's cool to do like the Kelsey Hightower no code demo, but unfortunately that's not the way it is in the real world. So I know both of you were on the program committee. Do you want to like tell me a little bit more, like maybe put like kind of like a face behind it, so it's not just kind of I'm submitting into this form? Can you tell me a little bit more about the program committee and like who all of y'all are?
I mean, I can't speak for the whole program committee. I will say that I generally am reviewing talks in like the service mesh realm, or like application developer, developer and application tooling, stuff like Helm. And I really I read through and I see, is this person telling a story of some software that they worked on or some software that they used? Maybe they had problems with it, maybe they didn't, but are they telling a story that other people can learn from? I try to say no to the ones that look like they are trying to do a thinly veiled product pitch, because I feel like all of us have many opportunities to watch advertisements, and we don't really want to do that at KubeCon. We want to see the stories of things people have built, things people have experimented with, experiences people have had in their teams, experiences people have had launching their open source projects. Yeah, what do you think, Karen?
Yeah, well, I was going to touch a little bit more on kind of like how, like what the program committee or how it's structured. So my understanding is the program committee is a huge group of people that have been asked to be on the program committee. And, this can be a combination of like like CNCF project maintainers, people who've been on the committee before, or yeah, they're invited in, and also like they work closely with the co-chairs who, yeah. So, the program committee looks at the talks, they provide their feedback, comments, ratings, and then this gets elevated up to the track chairs, who then give their next set of, I guess, recommendations. And then ultimately, the co-chairs take a look at everything, and then they kind of build the agenda from there. Like I think sometimes you can have a talk that's really great, but you also have to kind of figure out like where it fits into the current narrative, right? Because like your talk will fit in, or will have to fit in somewhere with all the other talks in that moment. So think about the relevancy of it all in this current moment. Yeah, and then in terms of my experience, yeah, I've been reviewing talks in the past for the community track, and also the 101 track that I had mentioned earlier, that's for beginners. Yeah.
And what you mentioned earlier, we were talking earlier about this idea of we might have more tracks focused on, say, failure studies or whatever. We don't have that specific track right now, but there are, I forget if it's like case studies or something, experience reports. There are tracks for, I want to tell the story of everything I did with some cloud native software, and it doesn't fit neatly into just service mesh or just, app dev or whatever. Like, don't worry. You do have to pick some things to tag. You have to pick some topics. I guess we might be getting into the mechanics then, but like when you're submitting your proposal to speak, you have to pick some topics, but you're not necessarily selecting the track. The track chairs and co-chairs would decide that.
As in, like, things can get moved, right? Like if there's a better track that your talk actually falls on, that's actually one of the things that the program committee can recommend. Yeah. Bridget, actually, I have a question that maybe you can touch on then. As like, if someone just has an idea that they want to share, how would you recommend that they figure out which track fits best?
So we talked a little bit before about, is this ready to share? It's a good idea, of course, if you work at a company, to find out, are they going to let you talk about your experiences in general? Are they going to let you talk about this project? Because if, for example, your company won't let you talk about a specific use case or implementation, but you can talk about the open source software package itself, then that might kind of influence, oh, I'm not telling a case study story. I'm telling a story about this specific software package informed by my experience, but I'm not talking about our how we dove in, any deep dive we did in terms of our use case. So that's a subtlety, but it's open the lines of communication early with your management and find out, what are you allowed to talk about? Because usually you could talk about the things that are not your company's secret sauce, as it were. And it's usually not a problem, but you usually have to have that conversation up your management chain before you submit something and then it gets accepted and you're like, yay, I'm going to give this talk. And your management's like, you super are not giving that talk. That is our competitive advantage. So like, just make sure you're aware of that nuance when you're deciding, if that helps at all.
Yeah. I have another question, and anyone can chime in. So one of the fields that you can choose from when you submit your CFP is kind of like the, level of expertise for intended audience. How can people get a sense of what those different levels are? Like how should they decide what level their talk is at? So the options are beginner, intermediate, and advanced.
You tell me.
Beginner. I mean, the beginner one's pretty obvious, right? It's like for people who are new to the space or like new to the conference even. And I think a lot of times, like a lot of those talks can fall into the KubeCon 101 track. But like, where do you draw the line between intermediate and advanced?
Oof.
Sorry, maybe that's a hard question.
I think that's a little bit subjective, isn't it? I think it also would probably depend a bit on the technology, where you're going to draw the line on one of the graduated projects like Kubernetes is probably going to be a little bit different than where you're going to draw the line on a sandbox project, just because the amount of experience people have and like the corner cases and edge cases people have run into and like the advanced use cases is probably different for each of those. I guess there's no hard and fast rule.
That's a really good point, because it does have something to do with the assumed experience that your audience would already have with the topic that you're talking about. And if you label it as an advanced, say an advanced security talk, then you're not going to start with, let us define security. Webster's dictionary says security is, like, you kind of make an assumption people are coming in with a certain amount of knowledge, exactly what that knowledge is. Some talks they'll list prerequisite, like we assume you know this, that, and the other, especially for more interactive things like workshops and whatnot. But I wonder if reviewing past talks from similar tracks from past KubeCons would be illustrative of what people could expect.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great suggestion. Yeah, always reference the older talks, right? Because obviously these are ones that did get accepted. And so like the program committee felt like there was value there in relation to all the other talks. Maybe, go ahead.
Oh, it just occurred to me. Bill mentioned something about CNCF levels. Let's make sure we go back to that, because I want to make sure that we're talking about what kind of relationship to the CNCF your proposal should have. But anyway, go on, Karen.
Oh, well, I was going to transition the topic, so you go first.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I want to make sure we talk about that a little bit because, of course, if something is a graduated CNCF project, people are likely to be talking about it at KubeCon. Maybe you have a sandbox project that was recently accepted and you want to talk about that. That's cool. If you want to talk about something that is not a CNCF project and is maybe not even open source and is maybe not even out there on GitHub, and maybe it's commercial software your company sells, or it's your SaaS, this is probably not the conference for that. Like your program committee members, your low level, just like I'm reviewing a few of the talks, people like me are going to read that and go, seems to lack relevance to this audience. I mean, maybe they would like it, but even if it isn't a direct product pitch, if it has nothing to do with the CNCF in general, it is going to be a harder sell, is at least my perception. I don't know what you folks think.
So when you said that, I had one specific thing come to mind that I did think worked okay. So there was a talk at this past KubeCon that was more around like the value of open source and basically like pitching it to, corporate, right? And so like it didn't necessarily tie directly to CNCF or its projects, but it was still about the culture of open source that I as a co-chair found was very relevant still. So I think I think there are a few edge cases where that could work, but in this case, it fell into the community track, right? And it was still true to the essence of open source, just maybe not necessarily very specific about an open source technology, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That works for me. What do you think, Bill?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's like part of it. I think the thing about, I think my favorite definition of what cloud native is on one part the technology, but the other part is like the community, because that's really like the strength and the power of it. And so being able to explain that is, I think, like also a really big part of what we do as the CNCF and at KubeCon too. So I think that definitely fits into it too.
Okay, so I was gonna kind of transition the conversation to more about maybe like what resources can people maybe tap into as they think about their proposals. And I'll give an example first. Like, so we talked about looking at older talks as like examples, but I also want to make sure people remember that like as you look at previous talks, you also don't want to redo them because, right, it's like the program committee isn't going to want to do a talk that they just saw like 1 or 2 conferences ago. And given that this group can have, like there are people who like serve on multiple program committees. So therefore, like there are people that are there to also catch, like they'll remember, like what happened at previous conferences. And so that being said, again, I wouldn't redo a talk or a similar topic because like I said, we want to try and keep these as relevant to like the current times. So that's kind of my little tip.
I'm laughing because I remember seeing when there was one year, I think I was reviewing talks for KubeCon and several other non-CNCF conferences. And some person put the same, it appeared he was running some sort of motivational seminar and he put the same proposal into all of these conferences. And I thought, okay, super not relevant. And also you're submitting the exact same thing to all these conferences. And if it gets picked up at some of them, they might not be super happy that you gave the same one. So CNCF prefers KubeCon to have KubeCon specific content. So make those modifications to it and maybe not the motivational speaker speech.
I think I saw that one too.
And you were like, what is this?
I'm like, did I log into the wrong?
Yeah, so are there any other resources people should look at to kind of help guide them on their CFP journey?
So I'm not sure how well this scales, but I've definitely seen members of the program committee and members of the community tweeting saying, I am happy to review talks with you. And I think that it scales to a certain extent, I think, on some community calls or on like the various, community Slacks and, Discords and what have you. But what would you say are some of the better avenues to get someone who is outside of your organization to review your proposal? Because like, I guess table stakes, make sure other people who work with you have read it, because if they, in my experience, when I've written up a proposal about something that I helped build, then I ran it by my colleagues. They reminded me of the things I forgot, and that made it so much more valuable. So like, make sure you talk to your colleagues, but after that, where would you say in the community they should talk to people, Karen?
First off, good point in pointing out having people review your talks. It's super, super valuable.
Do we have to clarify? You don't have to have written the talk and perform it for them to get them to review. Just have them start by reading your ideas and reading your submission. But anyway,
it's like, I don't want to volunteer people to do stuff, but I actually think so. I mean, obviously, like if you're not always going to stumble upon people who are openly saying like, come, let me read your talk, I will help you, right? So like, you might have to take a little bit more of a proactive approach. But I would actually consider like, if there's someone who's given a talk previously on a track that I want to submit to, I would maybe consider reaching out to them. I want to say that our community is pretty friendly, and like, I've definitely started conversations with people on Twitter. But, obviously be courteous, be respectful, and, reach out to people and just be like, hey, like, I'm considering submitting to this track. Maybe the people in the community who are a bit more public, or that, you've followed for a while, that like you can kind of like explain like why you want them to provide their feedback, right? Like maybe if they've, like they're like really well known in like your specific space, or like I think usually like reaching out to people and kind of sharing like, how you've been following them, or like what value you feel like they add, and reaching out and just asking for their advice. I think usually like, if and when you need help, at least when I try and ask people for stuff, I usually try and make it like as quick of an ask for them as possible, where I just like have everything ready to go, right? And just like be like, hey, like, can you take a look at this? Like, if you could spend like 10 minutes, that'd be great. And kind of, like going to the relevant people to ask for feedback, I think is really helpful. And then, that's my answer for now. If I come up with something else, I'll share it.
Do we have a more official channel that people can look for that, Bill?
Yeah. So this is where like I'm gonna like sneak in with like the CNCF perspective.
Cool.
So one thing that we do have is for any end user company, and that's one thing I think the community is really like well known for, is like really having like a strong end user community too. If anybody in that wants to help with their talk, Cheryl and Katie, who are kind of like leading the end user ecosystem at CNCF, are happy to review. And that just went out in their December newsletter. So please feel free to reach out to them if you're an end user. If you're a vendor, it's I would also be happy to help out, but it's not as official. But yeah, definitely. I think one of the things like at KubeCon is like really seeing those end user stories. I think is really cool and really helpful to see how other people are implementing this in production today.
Yeah, I will say if you work at a larger organization or a vendor and you're not sure if you want to give a conference talk, because that sounds like a whole thing, your organization probably has some sort of developer relations or community marketing or outbound messaging division. And if you as an engineer went to them and said, you know what, I don't think I have infinite time, but I am working on this cool CNCF related thing. Would you like to pair with me on a conference talk? I think probably one of the biggest illusions about conference talks is this idea that it is a completely solo endeavor. And that could not be further from the truth. I think a lot of talks at KubeCon are multi-speaker talks.
Yeah.
What are the guidelines around that these days?
Yeah,
it's
Bill,
like,
do you know?
It's like two speakers, unless it's a panel, something like that. I mean, you can't have like 5 speakers who take the 35 minutes and each give a 7-minute talk. You can't do that. But yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
you can definitely have two.
Yeah. So definitely have two. If you want to do more than that, then we like suggest a panel. And like one thing we also like to do in the Cloud Native community is encourage like diversity on our channel, on our panels, or like in the community as a whole. And so you just need to make sure that like at least one of the people is from like a diverse background, whether that's however you define it. So. Yeah, and I think there's lots of great people in the community, and I think that is really one of our strengths is having a diverse group of people.
I think one of the ways that I love to see that too, and I want to hear what you're going to say about that, Karen, but I'm going to just speak really quick and say one of the ways I want to see that, I want more and more of this, is people who are frequent speakers, find a colleague who isn't, and have them give the talk with you, because you'll be totally comfortable and they'll be able to do it.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that I completely agree with that. I actually haven't given a talk by myself yet. I don't speak super often, but the few times I have, like, I have paired with people who are more experienced speakers, and it's been so much better. Just because, like, like they're comfortable, like doing it, and they know how to submit CFPs, right? And then, like, yeah, it's just great because that way if you're more experienced, you give people who are newer an opportunity. And like I'm lucky, like that's kind of like how I got more introduced into doing public speaking. Yeah, so I highly recommend that. What else? I was gonna say, like another tip for people who are really new. So I help run a few different meetups, and what I try to encourage people to do, especially these days with a lot of like the more virtual stuff, is to kind of use meetups as kind of like your testing ground, especially if you're new at public speaking, because right now you don't have to actually do it in front of like a whole live audience. So I think kind of getting those practice rounds in through like smaller events can help make you feel more comfortable. And also, like, they're also just kind of good places to like test subject matters that you want to share with people. Yeah, so get your feet wet a little bit and then jump in.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I would say I always encourage people to speak at meetups and smaller community conferences before they try to speak at a larger event, just because of the pressure. The difference, I would say, in KubeCon EU this time will be just like KubeCon EU last time. It'll be a virtual event. One difference is, though you can probably tell from our voices that we're speaking to you from the US, there are very many people who are going to be in more EU time zones who are participating in KubeCon EU. And so you might be thinking, if you're in, say, Pacific Standard Time, oh gosh, KubeCon EU sounds very stressful. But do not despair, because you pre-record your talk. So you don't have to be super awake and giving a really great talk at 4 a.m. You don't. It's fine. Like, you join the chat. You don't worry too much about what your hair looks like. Like, it's fine. So that's,
and you get more takes because you get, like, you record it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh, the other thing that that I actually I've come around on the virtual event thing, I really appreciate, is when we were preparing the Helm talk for KubeCon in North America this time, Matt Farina, Matt Butcher, and I recorded an hour and a half of content for a 35-minute talk, mind you. Butcher's internet went out twice during it. Apparently, Boulder was having some sort of DDoS. I don't know. And then we had some really long rabbit holes about stuff that happened at airports. Anyway, we took that hour and a half of footage, edited it down to a really tight 35 minutes of really solid content. So just think about that. It's like, if you're stressed about doing this, get on a video meeting just like with this with your colleagues, talk about the software, and then edit it down to a perfect 35 minutes and put a little intro on it. Like, you have so much more flexibility with this format. It's kind of exciting.
Flexibility and control at the same time. Yeah. Do we want to maybe talk a little bit more about the things that we look for as the program committee when we review talks?
Yeah. Tell us the main thing that you're looking for or trying to eliminate.
Yeah, well, so like I mentioned earlier, right, like the program community is going to be very diverse, and we all come from different backgrounds, have different experience. So what I share is not necessarily going to be like what everyone does. But when I look at a talk, I personally like to see a clear outline of what is going to be discussed. Like a lot of times I see proposals, and this is like beyond just like this conference, like for other stuff that I reviewed, like I often like to see what's actually going to be discussed, because a lot of times people will come in with something very like, like just like really fluffy or vague. And I get that it's kind of meant to be like a build up to what they're going to talk about, but it's really hard for someone reviewing your talk to actually be able to judge the value of your talk without knowing the exact things that you're going to propose. And I think you can do that without necessarily giving away the whole entire talk, because you can just, I think like just an outline of the talk will serve that purpose, right? Just knowing like kind of the progression of the conversation that you're going to have, and then like just yeah.
Well, and what you're describing, because of the way the CNCF does the submission form, is completely possible. Like you can write the cover blurb for the audience, and then you can write the separate, here's the detailed outline for the program committee, and they go in different boxes. I don't know if Bill or you want to talk about like what kinds of things there are, but like those go in different boxes anyway. So it's you should definitely spill the beans in the one that's just for the program committee.
Yeah, so I have it pulled up right now just to remind myself what it looks like. But when you fill out the form, there's going to be one field that's the session description, and this is what will go on like the event schedule, right? So this is what's public, and then on top of that, there's a benefits to the ecosystem. So this is kind of your opportunity to speak to the program committee and stress like how this is important, who's going to gain value from this, and like Bridget said, like this is where you want to see the behind the scenes stuff that won't necessarily get posted, but that
it won't get posted.
It won't. But yeah, but that conveys like like the true points and like the things that maybe you don't want to be as publicized on your session description. I don't know. What do you look for, Bridget?
I think that there's a lot of work as imagined versus work as done. And I'm very biased towards seeing the work as done. Like I want to hear if you started down the path of writing this new software package and you want to tell the world about it, you should tell us that there were rabbit holes you went down that turned out to not be right, and that there were in your org there were repos you ended up archiving because they were an experiment and they weren't what you wanted. I don't like the very linear, sanitized story of we wanted to do X, so we did X. X is great. Here's X. Because I feel like we talked a little earlier about like reality. That how is anyone else who lives in the real world going to get benefit or value from that lesson? If the lesson is, if you guess right, everything will be perfect. Right? That's not a useful lesson. And so because I'm looking for the actionable takeaways for the audience, whatever the story is, it might be a great story, but I want to hear, how will this help the audience? What will the audience take away from this? When they've watched this talk, what will they feel inspired to do? Or what will they know? Or what will they have illuminated in their minds that they didn't have before? Because otherwise, what is the talk for? It could be your blog post. That's fine. If I do sometimes review talks, this seems to be a blog post.
Yeah, actually, you touched on a point that I found that I thought was important. It's just like, stating, what the key takeaway is, right? Like, because like even beyond convincing the program committee, you're going to want people to come to your talk, and you want to communicate to them what they're going to actually get from the talk. Yeah.
What do you think, Bill?
Me, I try to like think about like what talk I would want to go to. Cause like, I mean, like the hardest thing, like I think like at every KubeCon is like reading through it and like trying to decide like which one I'd go to. And so I try to rank it on like, if I would put this against like the average like KubeCon session, would I want to go to this one over it? And so like thinking about like my personal like perspective of like what is exciting and like what would really want me to like walk over there and spend the time.
Yeah, and there's definitely the fascinating and aspirational wow session, and that's cool. And sometimes those are the keynotes, and sometimes they're just like a really heavy hitting session in one of the tracks. And because it's a virtual event, there's also a little bit less in the oh no, I can't teleport from one end of the conference hall to another instantly. Like there's less of that, which is good. Like people can watch the session, on the rebroadcast, like as much as they want. But yeah, I definitely agree that you have to, as an attendee, you've got to go with your heart, what sounds interesting. And I think as a talk creator, you've got to go with what did I actually experience? And then as a selector, you've got to go with what will make the audience feel like they got value out of their time spent. Like what did they gain in terms of understanding? And maybe they just gained entertainment. And like, that's cool too, but you kind of have to balance that as a program committee and then up to track chair and then the co-chairs. They're not going to pick, only the funny talks or whatever.
Okay, so on the topic of trying to figure out like what session you want to go to, right? What kind of titles for like sessions do you find appealing? Any tips there?
This is where like we get into debate, like should we fall for clickbait or not? I think there's a couple of ones that are always like 10 weird ways your Kubernetes clusters fails, or like like other funny ones like that. I think it is important to put a little bit into the title, because like that's kind of like the first thing not only the reviewer sees, but also like the attendees of the conference. Like some people just like skim like all the titles, and so I think it is important to like definitely put some thought into the title, and maybe making it a little bit clickbaity.
I would say just watch out for the fact that the fields have a limit. So if you try to write a full sentence as your title, it might end up not being like, it won't even let you save if your title is too long. And then if you try to cut your sentence down to a slightly shorter sentence, it might not make sense. So just think about that. Because I see a lot of submissions that have a title sentence. And I'm like, I don't think you want a sentence there. So yeah.
I just checked. It's 75 characters is the limit.
Right. Which is fine for most titles, even with a, blah, blah, colon, the very exciting subtitle. Like it's fine for most, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like Bill mentioned, right? Like when you click through the schedule for KubeCon and you like see that whole like the layout on Sketch, right? Like what you do see is the title and then like speakers, and then until people click through to the rest of that, like to the talk itself, they're not going to get to see like the full session description just yet. So the title can be really important. So if you have the time, I would encourage you to like be very intentional about your title.
Yeah. Oh, and we should say, you mentioned Sketch, and I thought to myself, Sketch, and the place where you go and adjust to see things in your time zone and find out that your talk is at 4 a.m. and that sort of thing. And that made me remember, this is for KubeCon EU. So as a reviewer, even though I'm not EU based, but as a reviewer, if your talk is coming out of EMEA in general, it's definitely a point in your favor, because of course there's good tech happening everywhere across the globe, but it's especially case studies and that sort of thing. It's really nice for the actionable takeaways for the attendees to also be more congruent with them on whatever axes. And if the axis is in their geo, that's nice. So I would encourage people to, the conference presentations are in English, but they do have auto translation to all sorts of things. And it's a good opportunity to present at an international conference without a lot of the barriers. So yeah.
I have something to say, but I'm trying to figure out how to present a question so that you can say something too.
Sorry.
Let's see. Okay, let me talk first, and then maybe I can like phrase a question that I can then ask. So I reviewed several talks for the KubeCon 101 track for the last conference. And one of the things that I often saw that I wanted to point out was that a lot of people submitted their talks to the KubeCon 101 track like with the assumption that I assume this is what they thought, like they probably felt like it belonged there because it was like intro content to their specific technology, but it wasn't necessarily something that would be very relevant to a newcomer to the conference or to, to like Kubernetes or the cloud native space. Like, having like an intro, like a 101 talk on like service mesh, but it's like, if you're new, like that's not the first thing you're going to touch, right? So that's what I mean. And so I just wanted to point that out to like, just really like, I mean, for that specific track, right? It's like, it's very much so meant for people who are new to the space, not necessarily content that's 101 for actually an existing track already. So that's something I wanted to differentiate. But Bridget, like, have there been times where you felt like you saw a talk where like it didn't necessarily make sense that it was on that track, and like how, like how would you encourage people to think about this?
That's a really good question, Karen, because I feel like I brought this up at the beginning, and so we're kind of coming full circle. And I would recommend people not to overthink it, because that's what your track chairs and your co-chairs are for. They'll put if you have an idea and you want to talk about it, awesome. They will put your submission in the right place. Like, don't worry too much about that. But that said, maybe if you think to yourself, what are some of the overarching themes? Like, we're talking all about our move to Kubernetes, but it was really all about how we dealt with our data in terms of compliance. So yes, the topic is Kubernetes, but really exactly how we enforced our role-based access control and our compliance checklists through automation is what we actually are talking about. So maybe think about that. Just because if your topic is Kubernetes, congratulations, you are speaking at KubeCon. You probably have more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe one way to think about it, just based on what you just said, is like really focus on like who your audience would be, right? And just because, like you may fall into a bunch of different tracks, like they may all be relevant, but just think about like if someone is, because there are sometimes people who maybe follow specific tracks while they're at a conference because it's obviously like, more relevant to their role or something. So yeah, think about like what kind of audience follows specific tracks and like who you would speak the loudest to, I guess.
Yeah. And I know we're coming close to the end of our time. So I guess what I'll end on, and I want to hear what everyone wants to end on, but what I'll end on is you definitely should submit a proposal, because in this world that we're living in, the best thing we can do is support each other. And if you're telling the story of what you're learning, and sure, what you're accomplishing, what you're building, but even if you feel like you barely just kept your head above water this year, you still learned some stuff. And so you tell that story, and that's going to help people, and that's going to be awesome. So I highly recommend everyone who's listening to this and considering it, submit a talk. What do you think, Karen?
Yeah, I mean, I want to encourage like first-time speakers to submit talks, just because, like we love seeing new faces in the community. It's really refreshing. And yeah, so I mean, like, Bridget and I mentioned earlier, like if you're new, like you can consider doing a talk with someone else if that makes you more comfortable. And then just resurfacing what I said earlier, like you can practice your talks at smaller conferences or meetups. But yeah, if you're new, I highly encourage you to submit a talk. It's all like, even if you don't get selected, it's a learning experience. And sometimes it takes a few tries. Like I've definitely had talks not selected myself, right? But yeah, keep going and jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to echo what Karen said. Like, submit a talk. I think I've submitted to like 4 KubeCons now. I still haven't gotten accepted. So if that says anything, but I have gotten the chance to speak at lots of other conferences. And so like submit here. If it doesn't get accepted, like you can reuse like this content at a different one. As Bridget was saying, it's all about like the learning process. And I think even speaking and presenting it is part of the learning process too, being able to talk about what you've done. And so I think it's a great platform for anybody to be able to like learn that part of the process too. I guess maybe like one last question. If you could like have any talk at KubeCon EU, like what would it be? Like what do you both want to hear at KubeCon EU?
Oh, I mean, that's a vast question, but I would definitely say an experience report with all the warts from, the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, and the hopeful of someone who started using Kubernetes in their organization and how it went. Because I think stories like that help everyone else who's on this journey to not fall into the same pitfalls, but also jump right on the best tools and processes that you've used and practices. So yeah, I would love to have anybody at an organization of any size who has started a Kubernetes journey to talk a little bit about, hey, we started a Kubernetes journey. Maybe we even talked about it in the past. Here's how it's going. What do you think, Karen?
So I keep mentioning the 101 track because I'm a huge fan of it. So I'm going to go back to that and say that I just love seeing or like hearing from the perspective of people who are new and just kind of, starting out their journey or just recently started or about to start. I think, with each KubeCon, we keep seeing a higher number of people who are like first-time attendees. So I think kind of just sharing the earlier journeys are really valuable right now to just make sure that these people have stuff that is very relevant to them and that will help make the space seem less intimidating. Because I think for a lot of us, we've been here for a little bit and, we need the people who are newer to share their perspective and keep it relevant. That's what I want to see. I want to see some of the content that will help new people come along with us.
Oh, Karen, I have to agree with you so much because that newbie superpower of you have fresh eyes and you're having an experience and you're noticing all of the rough edges that we are completely numb to by this point. That's so important. Like whether it's in an open source project, you're coming in and you're just putting in a small pull request to the docs because turns out we all just kind of mentally added that as we went. And it's like, no, you need to, if you think your voice will just be lost in the mass of all the louder, more important, fancier voices, actually, your voice is probably the one we need to hear. That's what's going to move the community forward.
Yeah, definitely. My first contribution to open source was fixing a broken link in the docs. And I think anybody else's first contribution to open source can be submitting the CFP for KubeCon EU. So we want to hear your voice. So thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Karen. It was a great conversation. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to follow up with me on Twitter or with Bridget or Karen. I'm sure we can help you out. And we look forward to having your talk for KubeCon CloudNativeCon EU. Thanks.
Good luck.
Bye.